When the local star lanes echoed with the telltale anticipation of a significant rumor, a hush fell across the conquered worlds, for, in their weakness, a lone human warship had entered the confined sector to challenge the iron grip of their vile alien overlords. And in that instant, all of that changed, because humanity, once ignored, was about to prove its mettle. For millennia, the galaxy lay under the boot of the Zenith hierarchy, a coalition of alien races whose collective power eclipsed all who would challenge them. Under the strong hand of the mighty Zelvari Dominion, a powerful empire known for advanced weaponry and an unfriendly, unbroken code, the hierarchy expanded year after year. They bludgeoned dissent with ruthless efficiency, consuming worlds and draining them of resources, subjugating lesser species in the name of galactic order. The Zenith hierarchy appeared unstoppable to many. Their fleets of massive dreadnoughts, their web of indoctrinated soldiers filled the spiral arms. One by one, star systems surrendered, whole civilizations became a source of tribute in food, technology, and even personnel. The official line from the hierarchy was that their expansions brought peace, a forced order. In truth, that peace was only a shushed acceptance, terror in official pronouncements. The message was clear: resist, and you'd be erased. Against this big conquest, humans were an afterthought. Distant from the galactic core, the scattered human colonies had long been under the hierarchy's radar. They did not have the raw resources or strategic positioning that other species did. Earth itself occupied the quiet fringe of civilized space, managing a meager interplanetary trade and establishing minor alliances with other overlooked species. No one was betting heavily on humans. Others regarded them as comparatively primitive, limited to local trade, and missing the advanced warp drives of more powerful empires. Yet here in the dark alleys of Earth's nondescript star lanes, a crisis was brewing. The Zenith hierarchy's appetite for supremacy spread like a glowing fingers of flame, extending from the heart of the central spiral. Rumors suggested an expansion was in the works, an expansion led by a brutal warlord of the Zelvari named Gurnus Tyrax, who had set his sights on a new territory, the human-populated Moraine sector. Tyrax was ambitious, and it was rumored he had personally overseen the conquest of 30 star systems. His weapon of choice was fear, a jolt of unstoppable warships, then a stubborn ultimatum to surrender or die. All over human space, panic broke out as colonies rushed to put together improvised defenses, and refugees from neighboring species came with terrifying stories of hierarchy assimilation. Earth's leaders convened frantic summits, searching for some workable scheme. The naked truth was grim. Humanity's combined fleets were paltry, at best, a ragtag bunch of retiring destroyers and cruisers. Not even their top-tier technology could hold a candle to the cutting-edge plasma arrays and dimensional shield systems wielded by the hierarchy. Yet even as dread-mounted, a cadre of visionary officers united. One of its leading commanders, Admiral Amina Roth, was a tactical genius who had once buried her mind in ancient human battle logs, teasing out insights of unpredictability and cunning. Alongside her was Captain Elias Ward, a genius in the realms of invention and engineering, who had spent years picking apart the latest warp manipulation technology. They thought that, whereas humans lacked the raw force of the hierarchy, they had something far more dangerous: adaptability. That ability of humanity to improvise, along with a willingness to take extraordinary risks, could give them an advantage no one saw coming. Their scheme depended on one warship, the HSS Starhound. On paper, the vessel was a relic, an old battleship hull, scarred from skirmishes and refitted innumerable times. But the ship had undergone radical upgrades under Captain Ward's command. Ward's experimental kind of a warp manifold, dubbed the Ripple Drive, enabled brief-range quantum jumps that couldn't be detected in the expected way. Division Admiral Roth supervised the fitted stealth plating and imported custom railguns, salvaged from across human space. The Starhound was no ordinary vessel. It was an amalgam of prototype refinement, raw stick-to-itness, and a prayer that somehow it would be able to rival at least a fraction of the hierarchy's strength. This brazen plan sparked outrage. Veteran commanders scoffed at the notion that a single vessel, however cleverly refitted, could prevail against the hierarchy's inexorable columns. But Roth and Ward pushed ahead, believing that a bold, surgical strike might do what entire armadas could not. If they could even delay Gurnus Tyrax's forward operations, if they could sow chaos in the place by destroying key command vessels or supply lines, they might be able to stall the hierarchy's assault. For some, those shackled in servitude or about to capitulate, such a defeat may galvanize. Meanwhile, the noose tightened in the Moraine sector. Hierarchy advance fleets, heralded by Titanic Zelvari dreadnoughts, enacted pacification protocols on unwitting fringe colonies. Communications were jammed or hijacked. Planetary leaders were given ultimatums for unconditional surrender. Where local militias resisted, the dreadnoughts simply shelled the place from orbit with alarming ease. System by system, Tyrax's subfaction proclaimed success, making sure the entirety of the region was aware the Zenith hierarchy had arrived. Mankind could no longer wait. The clock was ticking toward invasion. The Starhound lifted off the blushing, bluish-gray dust of a hidden dock on Earth's moon, silence settling over the handful of witnesses to its departure. There were no grand parades or official ceremonies to celebrate this mission. Its success had relied on stealth and an ability to face down terrifying odds. At the helm was Admiral Roth, sided by an eclectic crew of misfits and specialists, each selected for expertise and an indomitable spirit. Captain Ward oversaw the warp calibrations on the bridge, the hum of the ripple drive resonating through the hull. One test jump, then straight to Moraine, Ward said, reading readouts. Roth nodded, expression set in grim resolve. There would soon be no going back. For the Earth or scattered colonies left behind, the Starhound was more than a warship, it was a banner of defiance. If that ship could break the chokehold the hierarchy had on it, perhaps the rest of humanity could finally come together. And if it failed, Earth's future would be locked beneath alien rule. As the Starhound vanished into a rippling quantum distortion, the future of trillions pinned to its mast, a soft whisper passed among the planetary defense committees. Godspeed to our daring sons and daughters. May your fight teach the galaxy what humanity is truly made of. So began humanity's desperate wager. The Zenith hierarchy was too great, their warlords too firmly rooted, to be overcome by traditional means. Only cunning, unity, and the dispensation that had turned the course of human history so many times might wrest victory from the jaws of certain doom. If the Starhound could penetrate the sector, if it could turn the tide, then perhaps man could rouse himself from the edge of obscurity and take his place among the stars. But the road ahead was paved with danger, and the crew sensed, even well in their hearts as to what to do, that the days ahead would put their wits and valor to the ultimate test. It had not been a smooth arrival for the Starhound in the Moraine sector. The warship emerged from a quantum ripple, barely avoiding a drifting field of destroyed satellites. Fragments of a crushed alien listening post lay strewn across the landscape, a mute reminder of the hierarchy's overbearing extermination. There was a faint energy signature indicating that a lone survivor's pod had ejected, but it was too late to save them. The occupant had died from vacuum exposure. This grim discovery brought home the stakes for everyone on board. Admiral Roth surveyed the sector map laid out atop the overhead hollow table. Known hierarchy positions were shown as bright red icons: battleships, carriers, and orbital stations. They illuminated the system's dominant shipping lanes like an inexorable tide. The devil's in the detail. Human intelligence was never perfect, and Tyrax's fleet was likely to be even larger than the chart indicated. The Starhound, masked by the sensorial cloaking bubble of the ripple drive's after effects, was merely another speck in a starlit expanse of enemies. "Captain, how's the cloak?" Roth asked quietly. Ward scanned the readouts. "Good enough for now, but the drive's huge energies won't entirely cloak us if a dreadnought's deep scanners pass closer than a few thousand kilometers. We're going to have to keep pushing, and quickly." The crew went to work, plotting a course around the thickest areas of enemy patrols. They were going to slip deeper into the heart of the sector, far beneath where Tyrax's command vessels were most likely orchestrating their conquest. The Starhound's first target was intelligence, finding the seat of Tyrax's operational control and eliminating it, if possible. Yet trouble soon found them. Days into the infiltration, pilfering through the shadow of an abandoned mining station. The Starhound's sensors pinged an incoming frigate from the hierarchy. The alien ship's flight path showed a random sweep, but it came disturbingly close. Captain Ward attempted to alter course, but it was too late. The frigate's advanced arrays detected the small amount of warp residue the ripple drive left in its wake. Red alarms blared. Roth shouted orders at the weapons crew. If we go running, we expose ourselves to the entire grid. We need to neutralize that frigate fast. A brief and bloody engagement ensued. The Starhound let loose with a barrage of experimental rail slugs and plasma bursts. The overwhelmed frigate disintegrated in a fireball, its comm array cut before it could send a mayday. A human warship floated in the debris. It was small win, but it unsettled the crew. The battle had demonstrated how vulnerable they really were. A fog and an alarm's terrifying wave of the ascendant hierarchy dreads. The atmosphere on board the Starhound was electric. Supply officers worried about scarce ammunition. Engineers hurriedly repaired stress fractures left in the wake of the firefight. Within the crew, factions had debated tactics. Some argued they should remain hidden, sticking only to recon. Others, angered by the savagery of the hierarchy, demanded a more assertive response. Weighing each decision carefully, Admiral Roth walked a fine line. Above all, she demanded caution. "We can't save anybody if we're dead," she reminded more hot-headed voices. Little did they know, Gurnus Tyrax himself had received fragmented reports of an unknown craft working the fringes of the sector. He had previously regarded them as exaggerated rumors of the internet, but the fragmentary data that resulted from the missing frigate did catch his attention. He instructed his staff to increase scans. If the humans did do this, Tyrax couldn't wait to personally smash the so-called upstarts. Human resistance was new to him, a source he believed he'd be able to exploit to solidify his reputation as the Zenith hierarchy's most fearsome enforcer. Over the coming weeks, the Starhound conducted pinpoint strikes. Small hierarchy outposts and communications relays would be sabotaged in the dead of night. Stealth infiltration teams boarded them, stealing data and planting charges that disabled the outposts. Barely a mission succeeded without the horror of loss, but the ship's infiltration squads, the best of the best, were selected not only for their tangible capabilities, but for their resourcefulness, for the pride they took in perfecting each mission. Every saboteur bought time for starved colonies, slowed expansion of the hierarchy, and all of them earned humanity a rare advantage. But those achievements came at a price. Each incursion depleted the Starhound's ever-dwindling munitions supply. Other infiltration teams returned with casualties, energy burns, missing limbs, or worse. The warship's now quiet halls grew somber, with stretchers and medical triage stations filling its passageways. Morale oscillated between desperation and hope. Admiral Roth found herself reciting eulogies and providing words of encouragement in equal parts. But the fighting spread beyond the humans' direct control. Inspired by stories of a ghostly raider targeting hierarchy assets, other alien factions started small-scale rebellions. On a few scattered planets, local militias took up arms, convinced that maybe the hierarchy wasn't as invincible as they thought after all. Tyrax clenched his fist in response, sending punitive fleets that rained fire on worlds that defied his will from orbit. TV images of devastation flickered on hijacked broadcast frequencies, disturbing the crew of the Starhound but also steel in their spine. Purposeful. They recognized that in some respects, the presence of this one warship was a catalyst. As weeks turned to months, the Starhound neared the reported position of Tyrax's flagship, the dreadnought Immolation. The Immolation inspired fear in dozens of star systems. Its vast silhouette a symbol of the hierarchy's implacable might. Tyrax reportedly coordinated nearly all operations in the sector from this absolute beast of a ship, said to bristle with advanced plasma arrays and near-impenetrable shielding. If the Starhound could ever neutralize or even cripple the Immolation, they would throw the whole chain of the hierarchy command into disarray. However, Admiral Roth faced a new crisis. Captain Ward's experimental ripple drive started exhibiting extreme signs of instability. The repeated quantum jumps and cloak activations had pushed the drive's delicate matrix well past design limits. Power surges threatened catastrophic meltdown. Without the drive, however, the Starhound would be just another slow-moving target in a sea of enemy ships. During an emergency briefing, Ward acknowledged the peril. We may only have one more big jump left in us before the drive fails completely. If that should happen, we'll have no cloak, no magic speed. We're going to be dependent on the sensors in the whole sector. The room fell silent. Admiral Roth took in the news with a somber look. So we need to make that final leap matter. We'll go for the immolation. She sat, allowing the shock to settle. We might not have the firepower to wipe it clean off the face of the earth, she said, but if we attack from the inside, or mess up its systems, it would buy us all a chance. A hushed debate ensued. Some officers felt the plan was too risky. The immolation was said to be unstoppable. Others saw it as exactly the kind of bold, surprising move that defined humanity's greatest triumphs throughout history. Ultimately, the crew all agreed. Their whole mission, since the moment they left Earth, had been to defy the impossible. It was the last roll of the dice. Tyrax, for his part, was getting impatient. Sabotage on crucial facilities was reported left and right. Eyewitness reports spoke of a phantom ship striking targets and vanishing under fantastic quantum aberrations. The knowledge that we humans, of all species, had thought up such clever responses enraged him. He commanded the immolation's escort fleet, heavy cruisers and assault carriers, to sweep the sector more aggressively. The Starhound would make a mistake soon or later, and Tyrax was going to hit it with disproportionate force. In one of the last skirmishes before the rendezvous, the Starhound stumbled across a hierarchy scouting detachment. Outgunned, the humans had nothing to do but retreat, until a lucky shot from a hierarchy cruiser ripped through one of the warship's secondary hull sections. Klaxons sounded, atmosphere vented, and several compartments were compromised. A last-ditch effort by the engineering teams was able to seal the affected decks off, yet the death toll rose. By the time the Starhound slipped away, a further dozen crew were lost. That night, with the battered warship floating in the quiet zone between star systems, Admiral Roth stalked the corridors, flowing past the anxious faces, the makeshift medical wards. She felt the cost to her people, the burden of each life sacrificed for this mission. But she also saw determination in their eyes. They had thought they could do this. They had thought that bringing down Tyrax's dreadnought was not merely possible but vital. Roth assembled her senior officers in the war room for one last address. We're nearly out of time. Ward's drive can take one more leap, two if we're lucky. Latest intel has the immolation in the Karnas subsystem. We close in, ambush them, and try to infiltrate and disable their main reactor from the inside. Even if we can't kill the dreadnought, we can have enough damage to loose the hierarchy's hold on this sector. Her words ignited a flicker of grim determination in the room. It was as risky a plan as any they'd tried, but nobody dared suggest otherwise. They had traveled too far, lost too much, to shrink back now. That was the only question remaining in the silence that followed, whether fortune would smile on them. And so the stage was set for a confrontation that would reverberate across every corner of the hierarchy's empire. One battered warship, low on everything but gall, prepared to hurl itself at the most powerful alien ship in the Moraine sector. As entire star systems looked on, in some cases in terror, in others in hope, the conflict flared up to a fever pitch. Admiral Roth and Warlord Tyrax both knew they would change the galaxy's balance of power here in the coming battle, whichever emerged the victor. The only question, whose cunning and courage would win out? Within the Karnas subsystem, all was chaos. Dozens of hierarchy ships patrolled the system's tiers, scanning for any trace of the elusive raider that had been plaguing the Moraine sector. In the center stood the immolation, a dreadnought-class vessel in a size class above even the largest of the support ships surrounding it. Its hull bristled with turreted plasma cannons, missile launchers, and layered shielding that endowed it with the terrifying aura of invulnerability. Somewhere at the heart of immolation, Gurnus Tyrax presided over reports with a cold, clipped eye. These humans, he was now positive it was humans, had compelled him to reallocate an entire sector's worth of materials to flush out one warship. The idea of being sucked into such measures for a little fish seething him, but also focused him. He would show these insubordinate upstarts the price of defiance. Just then, as if on cue, a sensor officer cried out. A distortion signature shimmered near the outer planets of the system. Had to be along the Ripple anomaly, sire, the officer hissed, referring to the starship's steady low-level quantum glitch. A predatory grin spread across Tyrax's lips. All ships to readiness condition 1, he ordered. They will leave Karnas won't who are alive. On the Starhound's bridge, the air crackled with tension. Captain Ward had placed himself at the heart of the console, hands suspended above the cool, weathered activation levers of the Ripple drive. The rest of the crew prepared for the final jump. Admiral Roth was pacing behind him, her eyes skimming over the tactical map of hierarchy vessels surrounding them like a pack of wolves waiting to pounce. It was do or die. Coordinates locked in, Ward said. We'll jump to within 5 kilometers of the Dreadnought's aft quarter. If we're lucky, we'll slip in behind their sensor envelope for just long enough to board or sabotage their main reactor. Admiral Roth set her jaw. Initiate the jump. All hands, battle stations. This is for everything we care about. The Ripple drive thumped. The pitch climbed until the whole ship shook with an unsettling whir. Then came the gut-wrenching switch. The Starhound blinked out of normal space, popping into white with a ripple of curves. In seconds, they appeared behind the immolation, so near that the Dreadnought's titanic engines blotted out every viewport. A shock went through the whole hierarchy fleet. Defensive sensors raced to gain information on the target. Tyrax's officers yelled conflicting instructions, unsure whether the detection was real or a computer anomaly. But the immolation spotted the quantum residue with its high advanced arrays, triggering an instant lock. The initial exchange was savage. The forward railguns of the Starhound fired in tightly controlled broadsides, angling for a penetration between the Dreadnought's banks of shield emplacements circling the engine cluster. Sparks and streams of molten metal blasted everywhere across the immolation's hull. The Dreadnought responded with horrific fury, a salvo of plasma beams that would have incinerated a normal cruiser. The Starhound spun beneath Admiral Roth's skillful commands, the crew calling on every ounce of warding energy from the scarred shields to withstand the detonating waves. They traded punishing blows back and forth. The Starhound's hull sagged in places, venting atmosphere from freshly opened wounds. Inside, engineers and damage control teams raced to seal compartments. While the size difference was staggering, the Starhound was nimble and crafty enough to avoid or withstand the brunt of the immolation's fire. A swarm of smaller hierarchy escorts closed in, attempting to box in the Starhound. That was the sign. Roth signaled a purpose-built boarding shuttle that had been outfitted for this moment. The craft launched from the belly of the Starhound, hugging the Dreadnought's superstructure in the chaos. Captain Ward himself led the infiltration squad directly, a half-dozen Marines armed with cutting torches and some light hacking gear. Their goal: compromise a weakness close to the immolation's reactor coolant lines, disrupt the main power grid, then escape before the Dreadnought's huge security core could react. The Starhound threaded dangerously close to the immolation's flank, covering the ship under heavy fire from the Dreadnought's secondary batteries. Each near miss jostled the boarding shuttle with buffeting shockwaves, but they kept going, slipping beneath the Dreadnought's dorsal wings. Ward's squad flew down and landed on a maintenance hatch, magnetizing to the hull. They chewed through layers of plating in minutes. Alarms sounded within the Dreadnought as the infiltration team breached their way onto the vessel. Meanwhile, during the infiltration, Admiral Roth faced the hardest challenge of her career, keeping the Starhound alive. Streams of alien cruisers intersected from every bearing, stabbing the starfield with neon weapon fire. The helm officer aboard the Starhound jinked and dove, using the vessel's comparatively small size to their advantage. Several times they skated within meters of the immolation's hull, compelling the larger hierarchy vessels to withhold fire, lest they hit their own Dreadnought. But the noose tightened with each passing second. Within the bones of the immolation, Ward's team raced down narrow passageways. They met little resistance initially, with the Dreadnought's security forces distracted by the external threat to the Starhound. But the farther they went down, the more alerts flashed. Automated turrets and packs of hierarchy soldiers assaulted their advance, leading up to pitched firefights that scored every bulkhead. Finally, They arrived at the reactor coolant chamber. In the center was a massive cylindrical device, venting superheated plasma through carefully controlled channels. Ward went right to work, attaching an override device to the coolant system's main interface. And if they could trigger even a momentary meltdown, the reactor's safety protocols might disable much of the Dreadnought's critical systems. A horde of Zelvari shock troops flooded the chamber, bathed the group in plasma fire. The Marines fired back with rifles and grenades as Ward typed frantically on his portable console. "Just another minute," he called, sweat-slicked hands. Rays of energy bounced off crates, searing holes into the ground. One Marine went down, but the rest maintained steady fire. A beep from the override device signaled they were in. The coolant feed inverted in a catastrophic surge. Alarms blared, and red lights flooded the chamber. Ward ordered a retreat. They descended one by one down an emergency ladder well, scrambling back towards the hull breach. But more Zelvari were in their way, pushing them into combat with every ounce of resolve left in their bodies. By the time they scrambled back into the boarding shuttle with half the infiltration team bloodied in agonizing knots or worse, Admiral Roth, for his part, caught a glimmer in the immolation's shields. The sabotage was working, at least in part. The Dreadnought's power grid shuddered, and a number of its turrets went quiet, temporarily. She seized the opportunity. "Concentrate fire on the secondaries," she commanded. Railgun slugs and micro-torpedoes hammered the Dreadnought's flank to no effect, the Starhound attacking sodden with turrets. Dozens of huge batteries had exploded in a cascading chain reaction, creating gaping wounds in the Dreadnought's side. From his command throne, Tyrax was steaming with rage. "Take back the coolant systems," he roared to his engineers. "No more excuses." The immolation still had powerful weapons even with the threat of meltdown. A last volley raked the Starhound's hull. Consoles sizzled and an entire deck collapsed from the force. Admiral Roth went crashing to the floor, dazed. But the Starhound's infiltration shuttle returned just in time, docking quickly. Captain Ward spoke over comms, panting and alive. "We did it. Reactor meltdown is imminent. They might lock it down, but not without losing part of their power." Roth righted herself, pushing through the pain from what could be bruised ribs. "Helm, get us clear now." The Starhound heaved back off the Dreadnought. As the surrounding hierarchy escorts closed in, a wave of reactor instability rocked the immolation. Explosions went off all over its starboard quarter, and secondary blasts tore through its internal systems. The monstrous vessel had appeared vulnerable in the first moment in its history since it was commissioned, spewing flame, venting atmosphere in churning arcs. Hierarchy cruisers hung back, uncertain whether to charge or defend their wounded flagship. This moment of indecision was all the Starhound genie needed. Summoning the final reserves of warp energy from the ravaged Ripple Drive, Captain Ward initiated a short-range quantum jump beyond the immediate kill zone. The Starhound had blinked away. In a colorful wash of distortion, popping back into view several thousand kilometers distant, a gnat's wing from the hierarchy's blockade perimeter. Despite suffering severe damage, the warship managed to break through the beleaguered lines. The alien admirals sitting aboard their cruisers could only stare in disbelief as the battered, wretched little human craft slipped away, leaving the most powerful dreadnought in the sector crippled and bleeding. Tyrax raged and ordered pursuit, but the immolation systems were inches from the shutdown threshold, and many ships chose to defend their flagship instead. The Starhound limped out of the Karnas subsystem, smoke and sparks spilling from it, half its compartments sealed off and life support failing. But it was alive, and so was Admiral Roth's dream of breaking the hierarchy's grip on the Moraine sector. Word of the dreadnought's crippling reached nearly at once, transmitted by rebel couriers and intercepted comm signals. Word spread to far-flung colonial outposts, stoking belief that the Zenith hierarchy's machinery of conquest had finally met an adversary it could not eliminate with ruthless efficiency. Scattered uprisings roared to life across the Moraine sector. Local militias banded together under a single banner, the defeat of their immolation being proof to them that the hierarchy was not some invincible entity. Alien species that had shrunk in the face of Zelvari brutality found new courage. Even some hierarchy foot soldiers started doubting that their empire's victory was a foregone conclusion. For the crew of the Starhound, the price had been vast. Dozens of men and women were lying injured or dead. There were numerous structural breaches and a malfunctioning drive system. The ship was barely held together. But as they limped away from Karnas, every survivor knew they had achieved the impossible. They had outmaneuvered, outwitted, and finally defeated the greatest war machine in the Moraine sector. At least, they had not destroyed it, but no one else had ever given such body blow to it at all. Captain Ward slid down into a chair by the engineering bay, breathing out somewhat shakily. It was where Admiral Roth found him, equally exhausted. For a moment they said nothing. They simply acknowledged that their gamble had succeeded. Humanity had established its place in the galaxy. Meanwhile, in Karnas, as his flagship burned around him, Gurnus Tyrax stood with his arms crossed, his features contorted with rage and disbelief. It was unthinkable that a lesser race had wrought such damage on his crowning jewel. But it had happened, and the consequences would resonate through the Zenith hierarchy. He was certain of his method, and retaliation would come, of course, but so too would fear spread amongst his peers. And thus the tide changed, in one shattering confrontation that reshaped the sector's balance of power. One human warship had faced off against an alien empire's most lethal ship and come away. If not unscathed, then triumphant enough to redefine the galaxy's idea of who really held the upper hand. At last, the Moraine sector had received a story it could tell, of underdogs rising, of improbable grit, of hope ignited by the indomitable flame that is called humanity. The tattered Starhound would limp into a nondescript shipyard orbiting a backwater planet at the edge of the sector, and patchwork scaffolds and maintenance drones set to work at once, plugging hull breaches, stabilizing a faltering ripple drive. Inside the ship, survivors hugged one another, some weeping for friends killed, others quietly marveling at the stunning victory. News of the immolation's demise traveled faster than any official announcement could censor, igniting a fire of rebellion across dozens of worlds. In the ensuing weeks, the Moraine sector changed dramatically. Scattered and scared local resistance groups rallied under a single banner. The Coalition for Free Species was what they called themselves, and they saw the Starhound as their galvanizing symbol. While the Zenith hierarchy still had vast fleets, the air of complete dominance had cracked. The defeat of Gurnus Tyrax demonstrated that cunning and bravery could overthrow even the most massive war engine. Admiral Amina Roth, mending her wounds, welcomed embassies of species who had once dismissed humans as insignificant. Tyrax's Zelvari were still a threat, but even some of the other hierarchy members started to question whether it was worth the cost to continue a bloody campaign against such a stubborn opponent. A few weaker hierarchy factions defected and tried to form alliances with the newly re-empowered coalition. Skirmishes broke out across the sector as the balance of power hung in the balance. Elias Ward, the captain hailed as the genius behind the ripple drive, would spend hours in the repair bay, leading engineers and alien scientists who wanted to learn from his technology. They read the Starhound's battered hull as a blueprint for possibility, a testament to how quick thinking and brute determination could outmaneuver obliged approaches to standard tactics. Ward was never a braggart, never the one to play the hero card. He just wanted to make sure no random dictator could wipe out entire species at will. Memorials to the dead plastered themselves to the corridors of the Starhound and sprouted on liberated worlds. Many of those had paid the highest price to secure this fragile hope. Those veterans of that fight told tales of last-minute hacks, carpet corridor firefights against Zlevan troopers, and the glorious moment the immolation's capacious shields finally gave out. This retelling emphasized the same lesson. As much as humanity lacked advanced fleets and centuries-old traditions of war, it had an unconquerable spark. Gurnus Tyrax tended to his wounded pride, leaving the immolation in dock for long, tedious repairs. Rumors suggested he would be called back to the hierarchy's core worlds for assessment, a humiliating demotion for a rise-at-else warlord. Within the remaining districts of the Moraine sector, the once-feared phantasm of the immolation waxed pale and faded from people's minds. Eventually, new combat would arise, but the feared essence of Zelvari invincibility had been broken forever. Down on Earth, relief and celebration mingled with the solemn knowledge that the battle was not yet won. But for the first time in recent memory, the transmissions from the Moraine sector had sounded hopeful. Trading vessels were daring to cross once perilous frontiers. Diplomatic emissaries ventured into what had long been seen a death trap, making deals that, one day, may outshine the Zenith hierarchy's grip. The Starhound became not only an icon but a symbol of the resilience of those who looked for hope in a galaxy ruled by ancient paranoia. Historians would remember the day that single human warship crossed into the sector as a turning point, the moment that a passive species discovered their combined strength. There was no final rest, however, for Admiral Roth and Captain Ward. The Starhound's repairs would be done soon, and they would take off again, forging alliances, liberating worlds, and making sure that the hierarchy would never again conquer without opposition. The battle at Karnas was an end and a beginning, the first step towards a galaxy where might alone did not determine destiny. And so the word rang out across the cosmos. Whatever the odds, whatever the tyranny, humanity's creativity, and will could flash like a lightning bolt in the bleakest night. In a galaxy where aliens previously had dominion, the arrival of a solitary human ship forever altered the balance, demonstrating that it is the embodiment of freedom, born from those willing to fight, shall always prevail.